right, U-turn friends, you know that I bring the best and the brightest of the friends that I meet, the people I come across, and Terri Cole is an OG on this show. This is definitely not her first episode here. I've been on her show. Gosh, she's so brilliant. I'm so excited for this episode for you. She's a licensed psychotherapist, if you don't remember, and she is a relationship empowerment expert. She's the author of a book you've probably heard of called Boundary Boss. And now she has a new book coming out October 15th, 2024. It's called Too Much, A Guide to Breaking the Cycle of High Functioning Codependency. She coined that term. It couldn't be more valuable to really look at this idea of being an HFC, a high functioning codependent. Like, what does that really mean? And if you're hearing me now and you're just kind of getting started being like, what does that mean? Like, I don't know. I think about my codependent friends as ones that kind of contort themselves to accommodate other people or prevent other people from feeling uncomfortable. Maybe it's people pleasers. So we're going to get into that with Terri. And for over 2 decades, she's worked with all sorts of different clients, everybody from stay-at-home moms to celebrities, Fortune 500 CEOs. Really, she has such a gift for making complicated, psychological concepts so understandable. And she inspires over 1 million people every single week through her blog, her social media, her courses, and obviously her podcast, The Terri Cole Show, which I've been getting text messages from friends lately like, have you heard this? This is so good. I'm like, that's my girl, Terri. So thank you, Terri, for being back.
Ash, thanks for having me. I appreciate a hype girl moment. Thank you.
Gosh, I just value who you are so much. And I've come across so many people lately, Terri, because this new book is coming out for you, that it's like everybody just loves you. You're so loved. You really are.
Aw.
And I don't say that lightly because I know I'm a nice person, but I'm an honest person. And I will
Mhm.
hear people in my circle say, "Oh, this person's great, except this thing." Like they're honest with me. And with
Yeah.
you, it's just like a 10 out of 10 clean record. Everybody feels like the friendship you provide, the value you provide, the generosity of your spirit,
Mm.
and the impact of your work. And so I'm just loving you right now and hoping everybody stays listening because there's so much here. You've done so many things, Terri. Like, why this book now? Like, why?
Well, it kind of was a natural offshoot of Boundary Boss. So in Boundary Boss, I talk about high functioning codependency, but there's only one chapter where it's in there. And I had tons of people reach into me after being like, we need more on this. And so I did a course on codependency and really just went into the trenches to be like, okay, what is this? And it was so, to me, it was the next obvious thing that people needed.
Mm, mm. And I know a lot of people, like, I was kind of like entering in with a definition for myself of codependency. What
Mhm.
would you say is your official one, especially with high functioning codependency?
Well, we'll start with codependency, which I say is when you are overly invested in the feeling states, the outcomes, the situations, the circumstances, the relationships, the finances, the careers of the people in your life to the detriment of your own internal peace.
Hmm.
So,
Mm,
where the high functioning piece comes in, the irony with high functioning codependency is that the more capable you are, the less codependency looks like codependency, but it's still codependency. So
yeah.
how I came up with the phrase and the term, and then we'll make the distinctions, is that my therapy clients, who are all of these super capable, high functioning, very successful women, if I would say, hey, what you're describing is a codependent interaction or relationship, they would immediately just reject it out of hand, be like, yeah, no way, lady, wrong. Everyone depends on me. I'm not dependent on squat. I'm making all the dough. I'm
Mm,
managing all the people.
mm,
I'm getting it all done. I'm doing all the emotional labor. So I can't be codependent. And
mm,
I realized that they were stuck on the Melody Beatty, codependent no more. You've got to be enabling an alcoholic definition of codependency. So they didn't see themselves in the problem. So, as a therapist, I needed to find a way so that my clients could identify themselves in the problem so
mm,
that we could get to work on what the solution would be. And then I started looking and really, listen, obviously, you teach what you most need to learn, sister. This is how it is in life.
yeah.
So, this was my own flavor
Mhm,
of codependency, was high functioning codependency. There was no name for it.
mhm,
I didn't identify with the traditional in my 20s
Mm,
definition either, even though I was in recovery, but I just didn't. I was like, I'm not involved with addicts, so that can't be it.
mhm,
But what I ended up seeing was there was all these similarities where when you're a high functioning codependent, a lot of times you're not just codependent with the people in your life, you're sort of codependent with the greater world as well. It's
mm,
feeling overly responsible
mm,
for things and for people. And I actually opened the book in the introduction where I'm talking about I was coming back from going to my therapist in Long Island when I was living in Manhattan for many years. And I see this kid on the train and he's like, looks about 19. He's sitting down the platform. It's 10:30 at night on like a Tuesday. And he's
mm,
holding a little blanket. And I'm like, my helper radar pinging immediately, being like, what the hell is this kid doing out so late? Where are you going, buddy? So I start chatting him up on the train. And, his name was Billy and he was from Indiana and he was hired to drive a car back to Indiana. And then they canceled it. I go, so where are you going? He's like, I'm just going to go sleep in the station. I was like, what station? And he said, Penn Station. I was like, no, you're not. Have you been there, Billy? It's dangerous as hell. You'll definitely get mugged. You can't go there. He goes, well, I don't know anyone in New York. And I was like, yeah, you do. You know me. And so I brought Billy home to my studio apartment with my female roommate without even calling her to see if it was okay with her. That's what I'm talking about, that I couldn't bear the thought that this kid who had no experience in New York, and funny, he's a kid, he was 19, I was probably all of 22,
mm,
but I did live and work in the city and I thought that I could help. That is kind of codependent because I was being overly responsible. I
mm,
mean, I could have given him $10 if he needed money. I could have said, hey, man, I would not stay in the station if I were you. There's a youth hostel. There's a million other things I could have done that would have been more appropriate and safer,
mm,
but I couldn't because one of the mantras of being an HFC is I got it or it has to be me.
mm.
You know what I mean? We don't think that other people got it. We literally only think that we got it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, what do you think has happened? And I don't mean this in an insulting way for anybody, but like, what do you think happens in our upbringings that might contribute to creating this? Because it's interesting. Like, some people make jokes about me. They're like, you came out of the womb confident, and I'm pretty decent with
Hmm.
boundaries, but I definitely have my people pleaser codependency stuff that
Yep.
sneaks in. It really sneaks in. And it's interesting because it's kind of domain specific sometimes, right? Like,
Yep. Yep.
maybe you're not just a high functioning codependent everywhere sometimes. Like maybe it's just in your love life that you're the people
Yep.
pleaser. Everywhere else, you're like boundary boss, right?
Yep.
So how do we navigate and get clear on what that really looks like, where it comes from?
Well, childhood for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
listen, most of us were raised and praised for being self-abandoning codependents. Like
Yeah.
that's a fact. The
Yeah.
more self-sacrificing, the more feminine. Be compliant.
Hmm.
Really, can you just, where's my happy girl? That's what I want to know. And if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all, please.
Hmm.
Like, this is the messaging that we got. Nobody was like, tell me about your authentic self. That's not how it was. The kids
Yeah.
were, we were raised in a different way.
Yeah.
And there was an expectation from birth for most of us that we should be pleasing to other people. And so what we learned was to be very externally focused. Like, I want to make sure everyone around me is okay. I want
Yeah.
to make sure that everyone has what they need. I want to make sure everyone's happy. And it goes from your parents to your teachers, to your coaches, to your boyfriends, to your partners. Like, it just happens where we're very dialed in to other people and how they feel. If you're an HFC, you are like, you have a stadium of data
Mm,
in your brain
mm,
about other people, their likes, their dislikes, their political affiliations, the food they're allergic to. I mean, literally.
mm,
And most of the time, we don't expect that same consideration
mm.
from others. When you're an HFC, there's a lot of one way giving.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, we're the initiators of
Yeah.
that. So it's not like, oh, we're being abused. It's that we are, you know,
Creating it.
think about codependency. It is
Yeah.
an overt or covert bid to control other people's outcomes.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting looking at that because at the end of the day, there are so many people that give so much. Nobody's asking them to make the give.
Mhm.
And then they've co-created this reality where everybody expects things from them. I know we were just at lunch in LA, like, that was so nice, by the way,
Hmm.
and seeing you and listening to you, one of the things I was asking you about was that the nuance, which is one of the hardest things to figure out, is when am I being generous and when am I not taking care of myself? And,
Yeah.
um, yeah, like, how does somebody start to notice that?
The first thing I think that the easiest way to know if you're being codependent or caring is
Mhm.
to two things. Do a resentment inventory,
Resentment.
because if you're feeling resentment, you're probably overgiving or you need better boundaries or you need to set limits.
Yeah.
But I also will ask you to check your urgency when it comes to your relationship. So if your best friend calls you and is in, has a crisis, how quickly
Mm,
does that situation become your crisis? That's not the same as how quickly are you concerned. Obviously, we love our friends. We're concerned. We want to make sure everything's okay. But when you're an HFC, we feel overly responsible to deliver particular outcomes.
mm,
We feel a friend of mine was just telling me about that one of her best friends was in the middle of a divorce and
mm,
she didn't think her friend should get a divorce. And she inserted herself in the middle of it, was trying to get them to go to and she's like, I realize now, Tara, I know that's insane.
mm,
But it was like, I couldn't stand it. I felt like she was making a mistake. And
mm,
I'm like, yeah, babe, but that's her mistake to make, even if it is. It's her life. How could you possibly know what she should do? What you have to look at is the disruption, her life being disrupted
mm.
caused anxiety for you, and you want your anxiety to stop.
Mhm. That's okay. So that's probably something a lot of people deal with their parents is like they visit their family and everybody's giving unsolicited feedback. And what it really is anxiety. Like I experience that
Mhm.
with my mom all the time. My dad calls it jawboning. Like he's like, oh, you're jawboning. And she's like, no, I'm not. I'm just communicating. Like that's what she says. You're my daughter. I'm just communicating. And that's the thing. A lot of people have excuses to
Uh-huh.
keep their behaviors in place and stories that they tell the world to. Um, so how does somebody start to set a boundary with somebody that is continuing to overstep on their sovereignty? Yeah, like can you paint a picture of this dynamic and how we work with it?
I can, but here's the thing, as HFCs, a lot of times we are the people who are denying other people their sovereignty. We are the auto advice givers of the planet. We can't stop, won't stop
Hmm.
giving you our grade A advice. And most of the time we're smart and
Hmm.
accomplished. So it's not like we're just yakking. Like we actually probably have great ideas, but that doesn't mean that we have a right to share them, as you're saying, that you don't appreciate your mother endlessly sharing her opinion about what you should be doing when you haven't asked for advice. It
Right.
is overstepping boundaries. And as HFCs, it can be very difficult for us to see that auto advice giving is trampling on someone's boundary. If someone hasn't asked you, right, that is trampling on someone's boundary. So how do we handle it? I'll do it from both ways. From the HFC point of view, I'll walk you through this in the book. Instead of auto advice giving, you can learn to ask expansive questions. Start with, okay, before I weigh in, even if someone is coming to me for advice,
Mm-hmm.
which is very flattering. And of course, I set myself up in a world where people would be doing it all the time because that is HFC extraordinaire.
Yeah.
That's sublimating, right? My desire to control into a successful career. But anyway, I always say, hey, the most important thing is what you think. So let's just start with, what do you think you should do? If they say, I don't know, I go, if you did know, what would it be? Like just spitball, just let it go, just free associate. What would it be? We can be in the trenches with our people if they're struggling, if they're in pain. It is way more loving to be like, I'm here, even if you're confused, even if you're upset. I love you. You can ask a question. How can I best support you right now? That would be better than trying to tell someone what they should do or what amazing thing worked for you. So you think they should go to your knee doctor. Like all of that, when we really get it, that it's for us. When we auto advice give, it's for us. That
Mhm.
person having a problem is giving us anxiety.
Mm.
We want to fix that problem so our anxiety will stop.
Mm.
So it doesn't mean that maybe your heart is in the right place too. I thought my whole thing was just love. Like I thought that's what love was. Like I had no idea. So when you're from the point of view of the HFC, we can learn to ask expansive questions. When you're on the receiving end of another HFC trying to auto advice give you, what I did with my own mother is I kept pointing out, saying, "Hey, mom, I'm not looking for input right now. I would love it if you could just compassionately listen."
Mm.
And then it got to the point where she couldn't stop giving advice. And I said to her, "Listen, I've asked you multiple times
Mm.
to stop giving me advice because I'm not open for that. I'm not interested in that.
Mm.
And if you don't stop, I just won't talk to you about these things, mom, because
Mm.
it's so frustrating and I feel so like it's falling on deaf ears." And she
Mm.
was like, "Okay, all right. Well," so I mean, she got better. And sometimes I remind her, and now she's 87, turning 88. So I just let her do whatever the fuck she wants, but because as well I should.
Mhm.
But for years, I was able to have a much better relationship, a happier, healthier relationship with her by continuing to put up the boundary. And she'd get frustrated and she'd be like, "Well, obviously you want to be exhausted because you still choose to live this way. So I don't know." Like,
Mm.
she'd get pissed that I'm not doing what she thinks I should be doing. That's okay.
Mhm.
I don't care.
Mhm.
I do not want your advice. And I don't let anybody, I don't take unasked for advice from pretty much anybody.
What do
If
you
I'm
say
not looking, I
when
say,
you
"Hey, hey,
don't?
hey, one sec." I'll say, "One sec, one sec." And I'll say, "What I would love right now, if you could just listen with compassion, that's really what I need. I'm not looking for solutions. I'm going to figure this out like I do everything else. But right now I'm in pain and it really matters to me that you just be with me with where I am."
Interesting. Do you know, I had a partner, we used to ask each other, "Do you want comfort or solutions?" Right when they started, they would
Yep.
come, I think,
Yep.
and even Neil and I together, we do that now. I'm like, "Do you want comfort or solutions?"
Yep.
Um,
I love it.
I love listening to you and I love like reminding everybody of this information because maybe some people know some of it deep down and some of them don't, and they're in so much autopilot with it. But one of the things that I have always really struggled with is in romantic partnerships, because now
Mhm.
you're forming interdependence, right? Like a lot of my friends who are getting married, those topics of money, love, family, those all pop up. And we move out of a world where a crisis is just your problem. And we move into a world where, like, you're a unit, you share a home, you share your finances, whatever. So, for somebody who's listening right now and they're like, I'm over giving to my partner or I'm whatever,
Mhm.
how can we start to help people see that nuance of when you are being interdependent and you can have expectations, or do you need to form some agreements? Like, just because for me, me and my partner, we talk about life together and making that decision if we're going to fully merge and get married. And it's like, it feels dicey to figure out, like, if I want to have a kid, can I rely on you financially? Should I? Like, what does it
Mhm.
really mean to be empowered and not
Mhm.
codependent? So yeah, for anybody wondering about that.
I think that we have to start with where you are. Right? Wherever anyone is, that's the perfect place to start. So I think you have to look at, where are you doing things for your partner that they can and should be doing for themselves or for children, right? Where are you over functioning? Because one of the hallmarks of being an HFC is over giving, overdoing, over functioning, even over feeling
Mm.
everyone else's stuff. So how we can identify those things is you could do a quick resentment inventory,
Mm.
because usually where we're feeling a little resentment or tender about something, that means something is out of balance, something is out of
Mm.
whack. So maybe you're overgiving, maybe you need to, there needs to be some limits set
Mm.
somewhere, or maybe there needs to be more equitable distribution of domestic labor or whatever it is. You really have to look at, what am I doing? What is my partner doing? How do I feel about this? Do I feel like it's fair?
Mm.
Are we in this in the same way? And even if one partner has decided to stay home with children, let's say, there still needs to be an equitable distribution, because you can't be the default parent 24/7, which happens all the time with women in particular,
Mm.
where and they are. If anyone else is going out and going to the gym and has no idea where their kids are, then you're not the default parent, because the default parent has to always know
Yeah.
where the kids are and when they're getting picked up and who's picking them up and what's happening. So I think that we start with right now, no matter how young or old the relationship is, and whoever you're relating to, because this could be a romantic relationship and this could be familial, it could be with your siblings around aging parents. Like there's all types of situations where you might be the designated, hero child, let's say, the one who's expected to do more because that's your role in the family system. And maybe you don't want to. And
Mm-hmm.
so you need to really look at what is the expectations that are put on you, but where are you feeling resentful? Because that will become a GPS for what parts of your relationship need your attention.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I know that the giving autopilot that people get in is often not even noticed. And it's such a fine line of figuring out which relationships, I don't want to use the word equitable because it feels so tit for tat, but which ones do you feel like you're putting in and you're getting back and there's that clean circle? Um, you talked about resentment, and I think that's such a cool reference point of like, where do you have resentment? Because that's pointing you to where you're overextended.
Mhm.
And just from a communication perspective, how does somebody start to change their relationships if they look at it and say, like, hey, this is actually a relationship built on a horrible time for me, and I had no idea. Which I think
Mhm.
a lot of people don't even notice. It's just their friends, it's just who they connect to, and they don't realize. How do
Right.
people start to change that dynamic? Because I imagine doing a State of the Union and being like, hey, I just realized this relationship is built on a horrible time for me. It's like not going to be so maybe
Mhm.
there's some nuance to how people can course correct a relationship, especially because maybe the other person doesn't even need all the stuff that they're overgiving. They didn't even ask for
Right.
it.
I think that again, clarity before a conversation. So there was a famous article in Marie Claire a bunch of years ago that I actually wrote about in Boundary Boss about emotional labor. And it was a woman who um, she and her husband both were professionals. They both were engineers. And he was working from home one day and he texted her and said, can you text the dog walker and tell her that I'm home today and we don't need her?
Mm,
And she had this whole epiphany of like, why am I like the producer of life? Why am I the only person who has the dog walker's phone number? Why,
yeah.
why am I always the friggin' designated point person for everything? And
Hmm.
then she had this thought and she was like, you know what? We both work. I guess they didn't have kids yet. And she said, I really want to see like how equitable is it? Speaking of equitable, she went home and she took a whiteboard and she wrote down all the billions of things that she's responsible for, remembering family birthdays, end of the year teacher presents, where the kids are sleeping out, doctor's appointments, dentist appointments, blah, blah, all the things, shopping, cooking, whatever. And then she basically made a list of what her husband did. And her list was really friggin' long, and his list was a lot less long. And when he came home, she said, I actually want to renegotiate
Our
what we're
relationship.
doing
Yeah.
because I realized today that the fact that you don't have and it's a combination because, like you said, when you're in HFC, a lot of times we're doing things, we just take it over. No
Yeah.
one's asked us to. We just do it, A, because either we're perfectionists and we want it done a particular way or in a particular time frame, and we don't think they'll do it in the right way, or in the time frame, or we're just so used to what is the mantra of HFCs? One is, I got it,
Hmm.
right? One is, it has to be me,
Hmm.
right? We don't think other people. We're not great at receiving. We're not great at asking for help. If
Hmm.
you're really an active HFC, it's like your least favorite thing
Hmm.
because it makes you vulnerable in a way that doesn't feel good. Giving makes you feel like you're in control.
Hmm.
Receiving makes you feel like you're on the hook for something or you're responsible for something or you owe someone.
Hmm.
So anyway, I think that you can have that kind of a conversation like this woman did. And ultimately her husband, at first he was a little like, well, I mean, I didn't know you were so unhappy. She's like, that's not what I'm saying.
Hmm.
I'm saying I want more equity. I
Hmm.
want it to be more fair because we both contribute and I'm tired.
Hmm.
And he was able, when he saw it in black and white, he was like, okay, that's fair. You have 60 things and I have 7. That's not actually right.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's like, choose half of what I'm doing or a little less. And that's how they did it. So that's one idea that people can do.
Wow, I love it so much. Growing up as a kid with my dad losing a lot of his money and closing his business, I think I made a little promise to myself when I was 10 because I saw all the fun in our family go away when all the money went.
Right.
And I was like, well, I better make a lot of money so we can have a lot of fun. And I also kind of put it in my head, like, I better be the rescuer. Like, if anybody's ever financially stressed, I better just work so hard that nobody ever
Yep.
has to feel that. And I had a sister who was an addict. And it's so interesting, Terry. I don't know if I told you this
Mm-hmm.
when I saw you at lunch, but
Mm-mm.
I had a little psychedelic experience, which isn't something I've done much of.
Yep.
And
Yep.
2 minutes into really landing, I was asking myself, why, for so much of my life, had I been attracted to unavailable men or men that,
Mm-hmm.
and luckily now I have such a beautiful relationship. But I looked at it, and 2 minutes in, the voice in my head said, your sister was an addict, and you got so used to trying to prove to her to choose you because she was so unwell. And we used to do this
Mm.
thing as a kid called suicide drives. We would drive to her house in the valley to make sure she was alive because her work would
Mm.
call and say
Wow.
she's not here. And the thing about my dad was that he was always a very honest person and he couldn't manage his anxiety. So he would share a lot of what he was
Mm.
processing. And I'd be sitting in the car like 10 years old, looking, hoping my big sister is okay in the back seat.
Right.
So we would get there, and I just remember every birthday being like, Stacy, for my birthday this year, can you give up smoking cigarettes? What I was really asking her was, can you choose to be alive for me? Because I knew the
Right.
cigarettes or things would kill her. And so
Right.
this feeling in my body of begging for somebody to pick me instead of, pick life, pick me, be here with me,
Right.
became this template for love. And I never would have thought it came
Mm-hmm.
from a sibling. I would have thought it came from a parent. Like, and I used to tell myself a mental story of, oh, I pick unavailable men because my dad was anxious and stressed out and he wasn't as emotionally available. But no, it came from, I mean, obviously it's not binary, this or that, but a lot of
Sure.
it came from my sister. And because of that, I think I put myself in a lot of situations that would burn me out with in
Right.
love life. And luckily now, I have a hyper independent partner, and like the biggest thing he is learning with me and I'm learning with him is merging. Like, how do we merge when we're two strong people?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I know a lot of people are probably burnt out, like just so exhausted, and they don't even know it maybe. So can we talk a little bit about burnout and how to even get out of it, how to change it? Where does somebody who's listening, maybe they're like, holy shit, this is me. Like all I do is give to people. I'm on autopilot. Like I'm
Yep.
exhausted. Where do we go from here?
Well, if we look at the traits, right? So we've hit feeling responsible for other people's fixing other people's problems, giving till it hurts, always ready to jump into damage control mode, being kind of mad when people don't take our advice because we have good advice and then people don't take it, and then we're like, well, if Betty had listened to me, feeling exhausted, feeling resentful, feeling kind of bitter. And another thing is that we're not really having respect for other people's right to be self-determined.
Mm,
When we're sort of managing all the things, and what do those behaviors look like? I just want to establish this so that people who are listening can go, yeah, that's me.
mhm,
So, auto advice giving, we've already talked about, being overly self sacrificing, like endlessly taking one for the team, being like, I'm fine, it's fine.
mm,
Auto accommodating, that could be in public situations where you just find yourself somewhere and you're like, oh, I'll move if you two want to sit together. Like, accommodating a friend who's like, can you come, can we meet for lunch, but you come closer to me, like just automatically accommodating what
mm,
is happening because you want to avoid conflict.
mm,
We also have anticipatory planning, where you're going to be with someone and maybe you're trying to manipulate everything ahead of time, especially if they're a difficult person, where you're
mm.
like, oh, Uncle Bob is coming to the Christmas party. He hates Uncle Jimmy, though. I got to make sure they don't sit together. I got to make sure that I have the booze that both of them like. Rather than telling the truth and just telling Uncle Bob he can either behave and he can be invited to the party, or if he's going to act like an idiot, he can't come.
Ah,
We twist ourselves up into a pretzel
yeah.
to try to make sure that there's not a problem or a conflict. Overfunctioning, right? And now we create the overfunctioning and underfunctioning dynamics that create so much resentment. And ultimately, a shit ton of self abandonment is what is happening. So, anybody listening, you're like, is that you? Do you feel identified with any of that? Because if so, you're an HFC. And what is the cost to that?
Mm,
Burnout, as this is bringing us back around to what Ash was just talking about. Health issues, autoimmune disorders, TMJ, insomnia, migraines, burnout.
mm,
I also see that people live what I call life light, where you're not fully present because you're so much in your head and you're so much thinking and you're so much wanting to make sure there's not going to be problems that life doesn't, it's half as juicy,
mm.
half as impactful, half as joyful as it should be because we're so busy sort of like checking boxes and making sure everyone else is okay.
Yeah.
And in that process, we're also not fully self-expressed. So what do we do? This
Yeah.
is where we are at this point. Like, what can we do? We can stop auto advice giving, right? You're doing it right now by listening to this pod. Raise your awareness around the behaviors that we're talking about. Who kicks it up in you? It might be a sibling, right? It might be someone who reminds you of a sibling who
Mm,
was compromised and was sort of the identified patient in the family system, which takes up a lot of energy and creates a lot of chaos and also doesn't leave a lot
mm,
for the other children when you have an identified patient, whether it's someone who is addicted or whether it's someone with a mental health disorder, whatever it is. You need better boundaries. We need to be able to set limits and be
mm,
aware of like, do I want to do this? It's not just can I, because when you're an HFC, you are so capable. You
mm,
probably can,
mm,
right? You probably can make yourself do. I want us to start getting very interested in, do I want to?
mm.
And I think that just because you can doesn't mean you should also be something that you keep in your mind because you're highly capable. There's plenty of things you can do and plenty of people
Well,
you can bail out, but
well,
you
Terry,
doesn't
it's
mean you
like
should.
on top of that, it's like sometimes just because you don't want to doesn't mean you shouldn't, right? Like sometimes situations require generosity above yourself, above what you want. So that's so nuanced, but I love what you're saying. Okay. I'm
Mhm. So we got boundaries and then we got surrender because we need to surrender to the fact that people are sovereign, other people are sovereign. And
listening.
even if we love them, we do not have the power or the right to control them.
Mm,
So surrender to life, surrender to what is, surrender to the season in life that you're in. Like just surrender.
mm,
Another thing that Mel Robbins says that I think is helpful for HFCs, I wrote about this in the book, that if you have a friend who's doing something, but you don't think they should. And
mm.
I'm not talking about if they have if they're a heroin, they're getting a heroin addiction. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about life, how we are endlessly yum yucking everyone else's decisions all the time.
Yeah.
Always yum yuck, yum yuck, yum yuck. I like it. I don't like it. I wouldn't do it that way. I would do it differently, whatever it is. A way to avoid ourselves, of course, all this yum yucking. But we have to, in our minds, say, let them
Mm,
and see what happens to your nervous system when you just think,
let
let
that.
them, let them live. Let everyone has a right to succeed or fail, right? To flail, to not know, to be on their knees. We all have been through that. Nobody could have told me. Nobody could have spared me the different shit show experiences that I had in my life that made me who I am.
Yeah. Okay. So
Nobody.
this is so, I love let them, and I want to get into that more when it comes to family dynamics. I know a lot of people feel so
Mhm.
drained by their family, and it's so unfortunate, but it's just the truth. So I'm being a straight shooter here. I've seen a lot of people over functioning with family to accommodate the tough family member. Like, so funny you use
Mhm.
the example of Uncle Bob. I have an Uncle Bob, and my sister, she always had like very pale complexion, who she ended up passing away from her addiction later in life. But
Mhm.
she used to come on this family trip with us, and Uncle Bob, he'd always go, "Oh, if it isn't Stacy, the white water whale." Like that was like something he said to her. And
Wow.
so, I mean, obviously, these family dynamics, and she was so pissed. She would
Yep.
come over to me and be like, "Oh," and I feel like there's so many things. Like, for example, I'm seeing a lot of friends have babies. I'm seeing a lot of family members have a baby enter the family. And a
Mhm.
lot of new mothers, they struggle to drive anywhere because they're adjusting to a new type of life for the first couple of years.
Yep.
And with that comes some sort of switch in the cadence of the family, right? Like maybe they want everybody to come to them. Maybe they stop attending. And I know a lot of people might feel like, well, shit, if I don't function higher right now and show up for this person on their terms, the relationship doesn't exist,
Mhm.
right? Like there's certain friends where I'm like, if I don't show up at their house, they're not really in my life, you know? Like,
Mhm.
and my very close, close, close friends, that's not the case. But I think with family, it's a little
Yeah.
dicier.
Yep.
Um, how do you recommend people start to look at that? Because I can imagine there's a lot of grief if you course correct who you're being in your family, if you
Mhm.
course correct how you're showing up with your parents, if you have boundaries with your parents, with siblings, you don't want to drive, you don't want to, maybe they guilt you, it's their birthday and you don't want to drive an hour or they,
Mhm.
whatever. How do you start to be with yourself when you're probably feeling an extraordinary amount of grief if you move them into let them, right? Like, oh, let them be disappointed in me. Let me
Mhm.
not see my family because they want it their way and I don't want to do it that way. Um,
But I
yeah.
think there's ways to do it though. So with the disappoint them,
Mhm.
Cheryl Richardson has a book called Let Me Disappoint You. Because here's the thing. If we are going to not be codependent, if we are going to be sovereign ourselves, if we are going to prioritize what we think, how we feel, and what we want, we have to accept the mantra that other people will be disappointed at times.
Mm,
And so will we at times. And disappointment doesn't kill anybody and should not blow up a relationship,
mm,
right? And I think that there's almost fear in the assumption that, if I don't do it their way, we don't have a relationship. There I have the same friends I've had since 1972.
mm.
Literally, you weren't even a twinkle in anybody's eye. Um,
Yeah.
and those friendships, and we're all going away. We all turned 60 this year. We're all going on a trip together, like the same people. When they had little kids, and I didn't because I had a career, and then I married my children years later, they were in a certain cycle of life. I saw them, but not nearly as much as I had before because I wasn't in that cycle of life.
Right.
So if we saw each other even then, like twice a year, that was a lot. And we
Hmm.
still talked every once in a while, but there were years that we were less close. And it makes sense. But the bond was enduring. And then as all of our kids got older, then came back to seeing each other. And now we have weekends every quarter. We see each other. We travel every other year. Like it's amazing. But I think that we do what we're capable of doing. You have to consciously decide. We don't just fill in the gap because someone else has stepped back. Because if we do that, your life is just as important as your friends who have little babies,
Mm,
right? You have a baby that's called your business. I have a baby that's called my book. Like these are real things that most people in life are not going to do in the way that we're doing.
mm,
So I feel like it has to be, you got to value what you're doing too. When my friends or my children have little kids, I'm absolutely willing to do more of the traveling. Whoever has the littlest kid, then that's where we go, right? Like
right.
for the holidays or whatever, because it's hard.
Yeah.
But again, that's not forever. And so I think that we want to have enough flexibility
Mm,
that relationships can change. And we have to learn the language of boundaries. And if your friend or your sister says, I really want you to come to this birthday party, as you were saying, but you really don't want to, it's okay to say, hey, I love you. I'd love to take you to lunch on Saturday. I'm exhausted. I just cannot drive 2 hours tonight. I just don't think it's even safe. I just can't. I'm exhausted. So I'm
mm,
sorry. I know you're disappointed. And please let me make it up to you and let's go out on Saturday.
mm,
Like, this is the language of telling the truth where we have to choose ourselves at different points. And you will still, even when you're in recovery from being an HFC, you
mm,
will still compromise in your relationships because that's what relationships require us to do if they're going to be good.
mm,
But it can't be self abandonment. And we have to look at the distinction between compromise and self abandonment. They are not the same things.
mm, mm. Okay, I'm I know you have a phrase in your book and it's called living life light. And I love anything
Mhm.
about light, like Light, LIT, like all of it feels good. So, can we explain to everybody before we go soon, like what does that really mean?
Well, part of the living life light is that when we are actively HFC, we
Yeah.
live so much in our brains. We live so much in, we're thinking so much that we are not um, as present
Mm,
in life as
mm,
we would like to be. And so our experience is about half as juicy, about half as impactful, about half as interesting as
mm,
it would be if we could put down all of this hypervigilance around other people's feelings and things and situations and what they're doing and focus on the person in front of us and focus on where we are. So, really, in this case, we kind of want to avoid life light because
mm,
we really want the full fat life, so to speak, you know?
mhm, mhm, mhm. Um, it's been so wonderful to just hear this, and I've heard it, some of it from you before, some of it's like new for me. Obviously, I'm in your book right now and I'm like really enjoying myself. What have I not asked you about codependency that we want to make sure everybody knows before we go?
Sure. I think one of the biggest questions I get asked is how can I tell if I'm codependent or caring?
Mm,
And I think that the real question is how can we tell if we're codependent, caring, or controlling?
mm,
Because control is a huge part of being an HFC. This desire, this illusion of control, this desire for control. So my answer to that question is if you check your urgency and you're not losing it about whatever this person is doing, and their problem hasn't become your problem, but you are compassionately interested in being a part of their solution, that's caring. If your urgency says, this is now my problem to fix, that's codependency. And if you can't stop telling them what to do, that's controlling. So, what we really want is that place in the middle between where we can be loving, we
mm,
can be a compassionate listener, we can ask expansive questions, and we can really learn to stay on our own side of the street. And your relationships will be so much better for it.
mm.
And you will be so much more deeply known in your life because when we're controlling everything, people do not know us. They really don't. We know them, but they don't know us.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Terry, for coming back on. And where can everybody go? I know your book's going to be everywhere books are sold, October 15th, 2024. Guys, talk about unsolicited advice giving. I want to hand this book to some people, but that is the exact problem, but not really. Maybe I'll just leave it on their thing, on their nightstand.
Exactly.
Um, Terry, where is there some sort of special bonus situation you have
Yeah.
going on? Cool.
There is actually. So you guys can go to terricole.com/HFC for high functioning codependent. And I'm giving you an HFC toolkit. So if you're unsure where to start besides buying my book, oh, please do. But this will also help you figure out how to slow it down a little bit. I give you two lessons and also some meditations and some PDFs and some ideas of how to get started.
Thank you so much again for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, my friend.